Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for dialing in. I'm really excited to be hosting today's session with our panel of leading experts in the apprenticeship space. On this call, we have Anna Morrison, the founder of Amazing Apprenticeships, Kate Temple-Brown, co-founder of the Opportunity Group, and Lorcan Seary, the apprenticeship manager at Irwin Mitchell. Before we dive in, I just wanted to touch on a few housekeeping points. We aren't expecting any technical issues, so fingers crossed, but in the instance that we do experience any glitches, then please do bear with us. I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who pre-submitted their questions upon registration. We will do our best to cover off as many as possible, and please feel free to use the chat function as we go. But full disclosure, we will not be able to cover everything in the next hour. So this will be a whistle-stop tour of all things apprenticeship related. We are recording the session and we will follow up with a link to the recording, a summary of the key takeaways and various links and resources, as well as the contact details of the speakers. So if there are any questions that don't get answered today, you should have plenty of opportunity to continue the conversation. To kick off introductions, I assume most of you are already familiar with Dartmouth, but for the avoidance of doubt, we are an international search firm founded just over 10 years ago on a classroom to boardroom business model. So we take a bottom-up approach to talent acquisition, and I have the privilege of running our early careers team, which is essentially the classroom piece to that strategy. We are specialists in everything early careers and partner with our clients to design and run various events, initiatives, and recruitment programs, usually with a diversity lens, and we look to establish relationships with students from the grassroots. Up until 2020, our network started on campus, so from first year university students and upwards. However, the pandemic highlighted and magnified the growing issue of economic marginalisation and inequality, and a clear need to address and improve social mobility. This was emphasised by the results from our upcoming Gen Z report, which showed that 41.8% of this generation believe that socio-economic diversity is the single most urgent diversity issue facing the industry. However, they also believe that only 13.1% of employers share this priority. So there is clearly a lot of work that we need to do, and it's apparent that there are many invisible barriers to entry which exist even before university. As a result, we have pivoted and expanded our efforts to engage with students over the past 3 years from the school level, so mainly year 10 and upwards, focusing on deprivation cold spots and schools with high proportion of eligibility for free school meals. We have built our network of over 35 partner schools across the UK, which continues to grow, and we've created a platform for these school students under the Dartmouth Academy brand. Our aim is to leverage our experience and our professional networks to provide students with access to information, skills, workshops, networks, and ultimately opportunities, with a view to raise aspirations and set them up for success in the future. Leveraging our network of largely untapped talent, we've partnered with several clients now to host work experience sessions and start building out our school leaver and degree apprenticeship programs. Today's session will focus on the power of apprenticeships in terms of driving social mobility, and our panel of experts will be discussing everything from using the apprenticeship levy, which is not just a corporate tax, considerations when it comes to training options and providers, through to onboarding and implementing a programme and how to measure its impact and success. So our speakers will be sharing anecdotal and practical insights and guidance on how businesses can make a long-term positive impact through hiring apprenticeships. Before I hand over to our speakers, we thought it would be helpful just to get a sense of current level of exposure, knowledge, comfort when it comes to the topic of apprenticeships, and just to help shape their responses. So if you could all take a moment to complete our poll, which will hopefully come up now. So how ready is your company for an apprenticeship programme? I will share the results in a second. Perfect. So quite an equal split. Great to see loads of people already on the front foot, but also those who are interested in learning more. So as promised, I will now hand over to Lorcan to start the introductions.
Okay, thank you, Lizzie. Good morning, everybody. So yeah, my name's Lorcan. I'm the apprenticeship manager for Irwin Mitchell. So I deal with everything apprenticeships really. I'm part of the early careers team, so I do get involved in a lot of the other activity, but essentially my main remit is everything apprenticeships. Do you want me to continue, Lizzie, or was everyone else, sorry, being introduced? Apologies.
Yeah, if you could share your slides and
No worries
just
at all.
a bit about your background, that would be fantastic.
No problem. Okay, so I'm just going to take a few moments just to take you through some slides. Won't give you a moment. Hoping you can see my slides now.
Thank you.
Okay, so first things first, I wanted just to cover off a little bit of information about what an apprenticeship is. It's essentially a program offering an individual practical in-work training and experience, some of which come with a professional qualification. What I like about it, it gives a really structured learning pathway. A lot of people apply to ourselves at Irwin Mitchell because it enables them to earn whilst they learn, rather than going to university and incurring obviously quite a considerable amount of debt. What I also like, I've got fantastic partnerships with external training partners, training providers, and these are essential, a really sort of essential sort of matrix, if you like, to ensuring that a successful apprenticeship sort of offering can be built and maintained. The whole point of apprenticeships is about enhancing skills, knowledge and behaviour. And this is for new people who start within your organisation, but also for current existing colleagues. There's still quite a few myths out there, which I'm hopefully going to be able to help sort of bust along with the other presenters here today. But essentially apprenticeships can be used, and it's a lot more flexible now, the funding arrangements for all manner of individuals around the country. You also get time out to support your learning. So generally it's a minimum of 6 hours worth of learning off the job in order to support your study. I, for one, believe it's a great alternative to university. I'm certainly not here to say universities aren't right for people. What I would say is that universities can be right for certain people, and also apprenticeships can be right to certain individuals as well. My mantra, my real sort of goal this year is just to start spreading the message an awful lot more, so hopefully teachers, influencers, parents can understand a lot more about apprenticeships as an alternative career path to university. There's also an endpoint assessment as well, which basically tests that competence for those individuals in order to complete their apprenticeships. So in terms of the growth in apprenticeships, thankfully I've been involved in apprenticeships for a number of years. I think what was maybe deemed or perceived to be maybe low entry level sort of roles, or for roles certainly within the sort of blue collar industry, thankfully that perception has now changed. We've now got a number of 829 apprenticeship standards. I looked yesterday actually to get the latest figure, obviously which go across all sort of manner of sectors. It can also be used to upskill the colleagues as well, and some programs like some that we've got, we have some internal colleagues doing master's levels and degree levels, level 6 and level 7 through Crampfield, a number of other sort of very reputable organizations. In terms of the levels of apprenticeships, so there are a number that are on offer. We ourselves currently offer as a minimum at the advanced level 3, and this is equivalent to 2 A-level passes. The higher, which is 4, 5, 6 and 7, which is equivalent to a foundation degree, and also the master's level as well. So we tend to recruit a lot of our lawyers through the level 7, where we'll be training them to undergo that apprenticeship. Now, one of the themes, as Lizzie already alluded to, is how have apprenticeships enhanced socio-economic diversity. So I've been at Irwin Mitchell now for just over 2 years, but I'm fortunate to have been involved in the early careers landscape for about 20 years. So I've seen the sort of the pathways and the landscapes within early careers change significantly, and certainly for the better, in my opinion. But I think for us at Irwin Mitchell, we're fortunate that we have a number of offices around the country. We've got 18 sites, and certainly our key sort of focus, our key ambition is to recruit as many of those individuals within those communities, within those 18 sites, because obviously they're the communities in which we serve. So it does enable us to sort of go out and have that reach to source that great talent within those communities. But I think certainly some of the learnings that I've sort of seen in terms of making sure that you know, you can have an impact on enhancing socioeconomic diversity is you very much need a social sponsor within your organization. For me at Irwin Mitchell, one of the first things I did was look at the culture, the mission statement, the values, etc. of our organization, and also the corporate objectives, one of which is basically around diversity and inclusion. So certainly what I've tried to do is to dovetail all of my apprenticeship sort of aspirations into as many of those corporate objectives, those values, etc., as much as possible. We normally sort of target sort of school leavers, but anybody can apply for our roles. But even seeing sort of, you know, some really young individuals come into our business during the last 2 years since I've been here, it's made a massive difference to our equality and diversity sort of reach across the company. I think what's also really important is that not only do you get strategic support, but you also get the operational support as well. Quite often I've heard from sort of peers within the network that a lot of companies will sort of give that strategic support at the highest level, but actually when you come to interviewing candidates, etc., and you've got those operational leads interviewing those candidates, there can often be some reluctance to take maybe one more junior apprentice versus someone who may well be more experienced. So it's just really, really important to get that operational buy-in as well. I think one of the key things that I'm making some moves on here and enhancing my progress, although it's slower than I anticipated, is by having a robust sort of outreach sort of partnership with schools and colleges within those communities that I alluded to earlier. It's really, really important. Of the nearly 50 people who I've recruited as apprentices over the last 2 years, only 2 were actually informed about apprenticeships by their school or college. So for me, there's an awful lot more work to do. And I've also tried to reach out to about 40 schools over the last 12 months to promote some of our apprenticeships, some of which were our solicitor apprenticeships, which can, you know, ultimately qualify people joining straight from school to become a qualified solicitor, a saving of roughly £120,000. And it was really disappointing that not one of those schools students came to a webinar that I then hosted. So I'm definitely sort of keen to work with as many of you as possible to get that message across to schools that, yeah, university is great, but apprenticeships can also be great too. And just the final thing for me is making sure, you know, I want to make sure that once our people start, you know, they are very well sort of looked after, because for a lot of them it's their first sort of time in school, out of school, sorry, into work. I want to make sure that the pastoral sort of care, the support is there for them and their managers. So I've basically tried to make sure that there's a real robust sort of onboarding supporting program for both our managers and our apprentices. So I think that's me done now. I'm going to pass to Anna, I believe. So I'll stop sharing.
I'm actually going to go next, Lorcan. So hello,
okay,
everyone.
sorry, Kate.
That's okay. I'm Kate Temple Brown, and my background is also in early careers in financial services. So I worked at Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, BlackRock, and Bank of England as early careers managers, recruiters, or development specialists. And now what I've done is set up my own company, helping to translate the opportunity for corporates to understand how they can make brilliant, in fact, amazing apprenticeships in their organizations. And really from a consultative perspective, and hopefully using language and with the lens that you who are on this webinar today are hoping to create brilliant apprenticeships in your organizations. And my question actually in the intro was about how to set up and maximize the relationship with the training provider. But I'd actually like to reiterate that there is a step before that. And what I'm seeing a lot in the corporate world is people going straight to a training provider and asking them to help them set up an apprenticeship. And what I would say is your work starts before then, internally looking at what your skills gaps are, trying to find out what you need in your organization, and then determining how you want to deliver that need and those capability skills. Because what we find is the more that the employer themselves understands and empowers themselves to work on creating a talent strategy that involves apprenticeships and skills development, then the more robust the interaction is. And what was great was Lorcan was saying about what he does at Irwin Mitchell is absolutely look at it from an end-to-end perspective. And I would urge everyone on this call to really think strategically about what they are hoping to achieve at the beginning, and not try and outsource everything to a training provider, because it has to be your program that happens to be delivered as an apprenticeship would be the main thing that I would say. And with that, I will hand over to Anna, because I know there's lots of questions.
Thank you, Kate, and good morning, everyone. So my name's Anna Morrison. I'm the founder and director of an organisation called Amazing Apprenticeships. And we work with around 4,500 schools and colleges across the country, trying to raise awareness about apprenticeships. So totally take on board your point, Lorcan. There is always more work to be done. It's never going to be job done, because every year we have a new intake of students, we have teachers moving around, entering the profession, leaving the profession. So our role really is to try and raise the confidence levels of not just the careers advisors and careers leaders, but teachers, subject teachers, and young people themselves and their families to be able to really see apprenticeships as a credible option. So as well as our work with schools and colleges, we also do a lot of work with employers around the diversity and inclusion space, and helping them to look at how they can achieve greater social impact through their apprenticeship programmes. So I am briefed today to talk to you about the apprenticeship levy, which Lizzie has already mentioned as a corporate tax, which it is, you know, no one gets away without paying it, I'm afraid. So what I'm going to try and do is condense into a couple of minutes what normally you would spend half a day helping people to unpick, but I will do my best. So the apprenticeship levy was introduced in 2017, although it had been trailed for a number of years before then. We kind of knew it was coming. But in 2017, the apprenticeship levy took hold, and it is a mandatory tax because any organisation with a pay bill in excess of £3 million per year will become a levied employer. Now we have this terminology where you are either a levy paying employer or a non-levy employer. Doesn't necessarily relate to the size of the business, because of course you can have small organisations that have high salaries, therefore would tip into becoming a levy paying organisation. So we talk about levy and non-levy. The government really introduced it back in 2017 as part of a series of reforms that they were looking at around apprenticeships. But the big drive was to try and get employers to invest more in the skills and development of their workforce. But also they needed to look at a new way of kind of securing the way that the funding and the ecosystem around apprenticeships was working. So the apprenticeship levy actually only affects 2 to 3% of organisations in our country, but generates around 2.5 billion a year. So that is a huge kind of injection of money into the apprenticeship system. Now, the way that it works is it's calculated every month. So as part of the PAYE returns that go in, the government will know via HMRC whether you should be paying the levy or not. And at that point, that's where the levy comes out. It goes into a digital account. So at that point, it becomes not real money anymore, but it's a kind of a digital transaction. And in this digital account, which is held by gov.uk and overseen by the Department for Education and ESFA, the Education Skills Funding Agency, this digital account is where your money, your apprenticeship funding is kind of held. Now, with that levy, you need to be you need to have your account set up to be able to go and see how much money is in there. But each month those payments will go in and they will expire after 24 months. So the government give you 24 months, they give you 2 years to be able to spend the money that's in your apprenticeship levy account, in your digital account. If you don't, it expires and it goes back to Treasury. So you may have picked up stuff in the media previously about unspent levy. I think that certainly has been the case up until now, but the data seems to be showing that actually employers are getting very good at spending their levy, or better at spending their levy, and less of it going back as unspent levy back to the Treasury. So with that money that goes into your digital account, it can only be spent on apprenticeship training. So we often get questions about, well, can I use it to pay for the salaries of my apprentice? Can I use it to pay for other skills development programs? At the moment, you can only use that levy to pay for the apprenticeship training. And the amount that you will pay for that apprenticeship training is set by the government and the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. So Lorcan mentioned those apprenticeship standards. It's the Institute who will oversee the development of those standards. And then it's kind of the Department for Education and the Institute who will set the funding rate for those different apprenticeships. Now, this really links in with a point that Kate made around having a strategy around how you spend your levy. In the early days, we saw a lot of employers kind of rushing to see how they could maximise their apprenticeship levy spend. Well, actually, they either rushed towards spending it, perhaps without that strategy, you know, going straight to training providers and kind of trying to find the biggest, the apprenticeship standards with the highest funding bands, you know, that would get that levy spent most quickly. So we either saw that, or we saw other employers totally bury their head in their sand. This is going to go away, not something that we need to take action on. We don't mind, we'll just write it off as a tax. We're happy for it to disappear. I think as the economy has changed over the past few years, we've certainly seen many more organisations now say, hang on a minute, how can we get more out of our apprenticeship levy? Now, if you are a levy paying employer, then the funding that will be in your account will pay for 100% of your training. If you are a non-levy employer, there are two other things that can happen. Either it can be 100% funded by the government, or it can be 95% funded by the government, and there would be a 5% contribution from the employer. So if you were looking at an apprenticeship standard that was £10,000, for example, then the government may pay 95% of that, and you as the employer would be expected to contribute 5%. I'm trying to do all of this without slides, so apologies if I'm not going to lose you in the weeds. But the other thing that you can do with your apprenticeship levy, if you look at your levy account and you have unspent funds, is there's something called levy transfer, where you as an organisation can choose to transfer up to 25% of your unspent levy to other organisations. Now you could kind of you could use your digital account to kind of just put it out there, and then any non-levy organisation could apply for that funding. Or you may take a slightly more targeted approach where you could have a strategy that's around looking at your supply chain, looking at non-levy organisations in your local community or disadvantaged communities, or sectors that you want to see grow. You know, you can all sorts of different ways that you can look at that strategy, but there are different ways that you can spend that levy. And the other thing to mention is if you spend all of your levy, you actually switch to that non-levy employer. So you could then benefit from the 95% funding. So it does get very complex. This is why it's usually a half-day training session, but hopefully that gives you just a bit of an overview of the apprenticeship levy to get us started today.
Thank you, Anna. Very informative already. And I'm going to bounce straight back to you. How do you find out how much apprenticeship levy you have?
Okay, so you will need to have your apprenticeship account, so that digital account that's held on gov.uk. Now, someone in your organisation may have already set that up, or it could be something that someone in your finance team or HR team or someone with your payroll number will be able to go in and set up for you. All of the information is then in that digital account. So it works a bit like a bank account. You can see there are transactions and there are dates and there are statements, and you manage your whole apprenticeship programme through that digital account. But that's your starting point.
Thank you. And you mentioned at the moment what the apprenticeship levy covers. Are the government planning to change what the levy can be spent on?
Controversial, but no, not this government anyway. Now, Labour have come out and said, if we get into power, we will change the apprenticeship levy. But despite lots and lots of lobbying from various business groups, and some very convincing cases being put forward, the current government are not shifting or bending the rules at all. The only change we've seen is a slight increase, well, quite a big increase actually, over that levy transfer amount. So it started off quite small, I think it was 5%, and now we're up to 25%. So that's the only flex that we've seen.
Fair enough. And how specifically have apprenticeships been proven to enhance social mobility? Maybe Lorcan, you can chip in first.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. I think it would be useful, again, just for the people on the call, about just covering what social mobility is. And it refers to a change in a person's socio-economic situation. And the Social Mobility Commission exists to create a United Kingdom where the circumstance of birth do not determine outcomes in life. So for us, it's very much about trying to make sure we offer as many opportunities for people from all sort of backgrounds to have a really sort of worthwhile career at Irwin Mitchell. For us, it's very much been about trying to go out to those communities where we have those sites, and really just sort of like promoting those messages that there are alternatives to university. I alluded earlier to the fact I've taken on about 50 apprentices over the last 2 years, and I'd say probably about 20% of those individuals embarked on a year at university because they just weren't familiar enough with the with what apprenticeships were all about. So I think for me, it's very much a case of if we can all do a bit to promote the sort of the opportunities we have around sort of apprenticeships and the vacancies that we have, it just means that people don't feel like university is the only route to success. So for us, for instance, we've gone out last year where we've embarked on something called a solicitor apprenticeship, which is essentially where we recruit people from the ages of 18, so post A level, and we will bring them into our business and we will pay for their law degree, and we will also pay for their solicitors qualifying exams. Now, as alluded to earlier, it's saving around £120,000, where within sort of a matter of sort of 6.5 years, they can leave school and then become fully fledged qualified solicitors rather than having to follow that route, which is very expensive, the traditional route, obviously, but it just means that we found an alternative route and a pathway to recruit some brilliant, talented individuals who may never have thought that A, they can come and work for a law firm, but let alone be a qualified solicitor. So I think for me, just the way it's worked for ourselves, if we've got that infrastructure in place and we're trying to use that to our advantages to basically go out and look for those really bright people who, for a whole different variety of reasons, have never thought or aren't willing to sort of look at the university route.
Can I just jump in as well and say that I think the brilliant thing about an apprenticeship entry-level program is that, as well as technical skills, you have the time in the timetable to also include human skills in that as well. And we know that that's really important. And it gives the young people themselves time to improve their confidence, aspiration, and courage in the workplace as part of the program. Because the good thing about an apprenticeship is that it's very structured, and you have to spend a certain amount of time in learning, and you can use that as the employer, you can use that to your benefit to make sure that you're adding all these additional pieces into the program. And that's when you have a really good partnership with your training provider to say that your expectation is not just to do the technical piece, but also the human skills piece, which you could either deliver yourself if you've already got that capability in-house, but also you could ask the training provider to support you with that. And I would say that's the best piece of improving social mobility, because as you say, Lorcan, it's the longer term development through an organisation, not just hiring for diversity in the first instance.
Yeah, I think the other thing I just add, and again, because I think it's really, really important, is we do need to have a far more robust way of reaching out to those students and parents and teachers and those influences in the schools and colleges within the areas that we're looking to source that talent from. As I say, I've been in early careers for the last 20 years, and it's it's not moved at the pace I would have liked to have seen, but we're starting to make a real inroad into just trying to understand how better we can sort of like link into those local schools and colleges, because there's a real gap of information and knowledge, not just from the students themselves, but for the poor parents and those parents who aren't fortunate enough to be in those networks and have those sort of like contacts where they can hear about those apprenticeships. So yeah, I think it's all upon us all really to sort of try and help spread those messages.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that we've spent the past 3 years trying to build our network of kind of school networks, and it's been a real labour of love just because they have so many other priorities.
Yes.
But what steps can companies take to kind of start spreading the message about apprenticeships, maybe beyond the ones that we've briefly touched on?
Yeah, so I mean, I've put something in the text. So for me, you know, I've asked all my apprentices to actually sort of think about going back to their old schools, or if they've moved, to find a suitable secondary school or college within the area they've moved to. What that means is I've had about 50% of my apprentices already go back to their schools, spread the message about their journey, you know, what their opportunity has sort of given to them, and also to say that, yeah, they were probably getting some of them were getting parental pressure to think about university only, but thankfully they did some research and they got some you know, some sort of learning in terms of what was useful to them to help influence their parents and they're also their teachers. There still seems to be a fair bit of pressure on their students that if they're bright, you know, that the only route is university, and I've heard that from a lot of my apprentices themselves. So for me, it's just about making sure that that sort of information, that knowledge, is shared with all those stakeholders who can then make that big difference to that sort of decision-making process for those students and their families.
Super. And what do you see as the key blockers for companies that don't already have a programme in place? Maybe Kate, over to you first.
I think that the key blocker is starting. It's the enormity of the regulation and the complication, exactly as Anna was saying, even the funding. Lots of people are paying millions of pounds into a fund that you can't find that information. So I would say take some time to really understand your situation in the first instance and think of it in exactly the same way as setting up any commercially funded initiative that you were doing. And then the funding piece will sort itself out, because you will either be able to pay for it entirely through your levy, or you'll get a levy transfer, or we'll work with you to get co-investment. And I think what I'm seeing, and I've even been in meetings with, you know, heads of HR who during the meeting have suddenly realized they're paying £7 million a year into the levy, where they really had no idea, because it seems really complicated and it seems quite hidden, because exactly as Anna was saying, you have to find this whole nother system. But if you can take funding out for a moment and presume that that will be sorted, and also to create the intervention based on the measurable results for behaviour, skills and your diversity, rather than for spending the money. And I think exactly to your point, Anna, a lot of people at the beginning who were early adopters did it to spend the money. And that never ends well, is what I would say. Of doing this for 7 years, that's when you get the non-completion or the bad experience, or it just withers on the vine and you never do it again. What I also think is that a lot of people who started to do this in 2017 have had a bad experience and don't want to go back there. And actually, it's actually quite different in terms of, exactly to Lorcan's point, the solicitor pathway is very new. The way that you can do so much more digital standards. There are things like digital community manager and digital marketer that are brand new to the 829 standards, that are super helpful in any organization, and very much something that you could bring in a young person as their first job to do. But most organizations don't even realize they could do that. So I think if you start with the skills, you won't go far wrong, but really try and park the funding piece, even though that sounds crazy, but the funding piece you can sort out after you know what you want.
If I may as well just interject, Lizzie, just for a moment. I've also sort of been using apprenticeships as well to work really closely with our HR partners, looking at future skills needs of the business. So obviously, since the COVID pandemic, I think certainly what I saw, a lot of organizations were sort of downsizing, right sizing, whatever sort of terms you want to use. What that then meant was that they were having to look at their resources, their FTE really, really closely. And along with that, I used it as a bit of an opportunity then to look at our future skills. So even now with Irwin Mitchell, we're looking at the future skills that we anticipate needing, you know, with all this sort of changes in technology, AI, etc., you know, looking at all those sort of fundamental skill sets we will need as an organization to help secure our future, I suppose, prosperity, I suppose. So I'm working very closely with my HR business partners and our OD teams, our organizational design teams, to think about, right, okay, you know, and there's so many different that Kate was just alluding to, there's so many apprenticeships in the tech and IT arena. We're looking at both what can we do within those spaces. I would think about retraining some of our colleagues who might want to sort of retrain and think about that sort of future skill set for themselves, but very much thinking as well about how we can make sure that we are a strong business in the future.
If I may just add as well, Lizzie, as a small business, our program, our apprenticeship program, will be 1s and 2s. And I know Lorcan's mentioned 50, but I think perhaps one of the challenges or blockers that businesses might think is, how are we going to resource this? You know, bringing in 50 apprentices all at once. And my advice would be, don't even start on that scale. You know, you need to find the right team, the nurturing environment where it's going to have the greatest chance of success, because then that will give you those really robust foundations to be able to grow it throughout the organisation and look at different teams and departments.
You're preempting all my questions. So would it be an issue if you just hired one apprentice and they're not part of a cohort?
I don't think so, but I do think what's important to remember is, particularly if you're bringing in a young person, so perhaps someone who's left school and they're 18, you need to think about how they're going to feel being part of the team. You know, are there going to be other young people for them to work with? And even the difference between an 18 and a 22-year-old, you might think, oh, they're quite close in age, they'll be friends. It doesn't work like that. So you do need to really think about, well, you know, how are we going to help that individual to settle in, to feel part of the team? How can we create a cohort for them? So it could be working with a training provider, you know, depending on the delivery model that training provider has in place. They could go off to lessons in a university and another training provider and spend a day or spend time with other apprentices from other organizations, and that can help to bring that sense of cohort for them without that necessarily being in the workplace. Or it could be other local organisations, or Lorcan mentioned ambassadors. You know, there are apprenticeship ambassador networks that your apprentices could join. So there are creative ways that you can think about kind of creating that sense of cohort around the individual, even if it's small numbers.
And even if you're a group of similar sector organisations that are small and each of you want to take one, you could make that cohort yourselves and work with the same training provider on the same programme. So you've got the economies of scale of negotiating with the training provider to deliver more for you and support you. But then those young people, we did a programme during COVID in the creative agencies, where they were bringing in as a social mobility program, and very often the young person who was coming in was the only person of colour in the organisation. And so what we wanted to do is make sure that they had an inclusion strategy and an equity feel across the cohort, so that they could ask questions and interact with people, exactly as you were saying, Anna, who they felt that they had their own support network outside of this small agency that didn't necessarily reflect what their questions would necessarily be.
And Kate, how do you select the right training provider? The $1 million question.
It is the $1 million question. And the really annoying answer is it depends. The reason it depends is, once you as the organisation have decided what you want and need, then I would suggest doing, as you would in a commercial sense, probably a beauty parade. So take it to market, decide what you need, and ask several people in your network if they've had good or bad experiences with training providers. What I've found is the size of a marketing budget of a training provider is inversely reflected on the quality of experience that you get when you hire said training provider. So don't presume because you've heard of it and they've been around for a while that they are better than someone who might be a small independent training provider The other thing is, and I should have said this in terms of one of the barriers, is the government platforms are really hard to navigate because they're not very helpful. So there is a link that we'll be sending out in our resources afterwards, which is the Apprenticeship Institute of Apprenticeships website, and on that are all 829, but you need to know what you're searching for to find it. And for some reason, abattoir worker always comes up first, whatever you search for. And things like, but when you find the standard that you want, there is a button to click to say find a training provider, and all the people who are registered to deliver that come up in a link, and that might be 5 people, it might be 500. So I would say ask your network. And also, I think as Dartmouth are getting more and more engaged in this process, Dartmouth themselves will have more of an idea of people that they can introduce you to who have done a good job. And that's why it's brilliant to have Lorcan here as well, because you can say, we work with this person, they did this well. And often, even though Lorcan might use them for a solicitor apprenticeship, they may do leadership and management or team leader or digital skills as well. And fundamentally, I believe it's the culture and the values of the training provider are more important actually than their digital capability necessarily, because they can bring that expertise in. So that's what I would say.
I think the other thing that I'd just like to add there, Kate, if I may, is I just was looking to recruit an apprentice recently within a new sort of area that we set up a new sort of department in. And I could have gone with a very well-known provider. So I looked at their Ofsted reports. Now, however much you sort of look at those Ofsted and care for them, it was a really useful process for me to compare their Ofsted reports. And just looking at that Ofsted report, I actually went for the smaller provider. I just felt that that was right for that particular program and right for the particular business area as well. So you'll be able to find all those Ofsted reports again if you just Google them as well. But you can also find them in the details that will be on the links that Kate alluded to earlier.
I think just use the Ofsted report as one data point. Some of them are 2 years out of date, and so much has happened in those 2 years. Yeah. But I do believe it's useful for the one data point. And I think when I say beauty parade, I mean, you would add that into it. You would ask them to give you an information. They may have had other audits as well, or internal audits. So that tells you a lot about the, and also some of them will not respond when you ask them to. So that will tell you all you need to know as well about their expectation of supporting you as their client.
Fantastic. And how involved are the training providers during the apprenticeship programme? Maybe Lorcan, you can talk about your personal experience.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Lizzie. I mean, for me, I've always had a fundamental sort of like, I suppose, yearning to get involved and have a really true partnership with the training providers. Again, I'm fortunate, you know, my remit is as apprenticeship manager. I always have a very close relationship with the training providers. That's what I've just seen work really well for me, not just here, but in my former sort of like careers as well. But again, I've come across some very good ones, and I've got a couple now who I hold up as my flagship sort of training providers in terms of the service that they give me, the service that they give to our apprentices and our managers. And I'm slowly working through some of our other training providers who we work with, just to see if they can sort of come up with that sort of quality and level of service as well. But on the whole, I mean, I'm fortunate I have a very good relationship with all our training providers, because they are key. You know, there's a tri-party relationship. There's them, there's the manager, and then there's the apprentice, and then I oversee everything to make sure that the experiences of all our stakeholders involved is a really positive one. So for me, they're very, very important.
Okay, I don't know if you have anything to add, or Anna.
I would echo Lorcan's point.
Yeah, but I would also say, as an employer, you are completely within your right to set up a service level agreement with your training provider. What tends to happen is when you are embarking on an apprenticeship journey, you as an employer get a lot of forms and agreements and corporate agreements to sign. And I think a lot of employers feel like they can't drive that expectation in any way, so they just passively sign everything that they need to sign. I would recommend that you use a service level agreement, so you set out your expectation of how often you meet them, what they give you, when they give you data, what the data looks like, so that you are in control of the progress, as again you would be if it wasn't levy funded. And the number of clients I speak to who are surprised that they're allowed to do that I'm like, yeah, they are your supplier.
Really.
And I think people get overwhelmed because it is that tripart. You have to sign an agreement with the government to say that you as an employer will support your apprentice, and that's absolutely brilliant. But by the same token, take control and have a service level agreement with them as well.
I think that's been one of the big shifts with the introduction of the levy, actually, where perhaps apprenticeship training previously was fully funded, and therefore employers didn't feel like they could make requests of their training provider and actually compare and contrast. And if you're not happy, you are purchasing their services, so you are totally within your right to speak to your training provider and ask them to do better or add things onto the program, which is another option as well. Sometimes the add-ons may not be funded, so then there could be additional costs. You can also change training provider should the relationship not work out as you had intended. And with some apprenticeship standards being a duration of maybe between 4 and 6 years for some of the higher level and degree level, that's very important, I think, to keep in mind as well, so that you have options as an employer to get the best out of the system.
Fantastic. And if a company decides to go ahead, what are the most important steps to work through when actually building the programme?
Well, hopefully by the time you decided to go ahead, you've got your strategy, you know the types of people that you are trying to employ, and you know the skills that you want them to have. Absolutely. And it's not just because I'm here on the webinar today. I would say partner with somebody like Dartmouth, because it's brilliant that Lorcan is spending time with the schools, but most people don't have time to do their own outreach. And there are thousands of schools, particularly if you want to attract different people in different areas to reflect your offices. So I would outsource the recruitment, but by the same token, I would still be very involved. I would recommend that you include your strengths-based applications, should you have that, and focus on behaviours and very much focus on potential. And then the other piece, which is often overlooked and then regretted, is engage your line managers, your senior managers, everybody in the business, so that everybody knows that they've got a new type of population coming into the business. What you hopefully will realise is there's a lot of people who really want to be involved, share their stories, make them feel welcome, mentor them. But the worst thing you can do is just think that you can just slide in, particularly if you think there's only one person coming in. Then I think often is forgotten that it is a very different way of learning, earning and learning at the same time, time off the job, needing work experience when they're in role is often a new way of experiencing learning in your business. So I would recommend, and we always offer this, is to do an all company engagement event, like a town hall, so that everybody realizes, even if it's one person, that you are starting to maximize the apprenticeship opportunity. And I truly believe that time spent will not be regretted, because the more you've got line managers engaged and understanding what a young person is following, the more that they can support them, and then they can go to them and they will be more successful, as will the programme.
Such a good point, Kate.
Sorry, go on,
I was just going to say, it's really important to kind of, if colleagues haven't been close to apprenticeships over the recent years, to kind of really understand how apprenticeships have changed and how much more robust they are now in terms of the expectation from the employer and the apprentice and the training provider, of course. And that we're not looking at a kind of low pay, low skill, devalued type role that perhaps apprenticeships of 15, 20 years ago may have had that perception. This is very much an investment. You get out what you put in, and you know, the salary is just one small part of it. The apprenticeship training is one small part of it. Actually, the biggest investment, I would say, comes from the work of colleagues in nurturing and supporting and developing and growing that individual. But actually, that's a huge boost to the workforce. You will see colleagues kind of really enjoy actually passing on their knowledge, being able to spend time with that individual, and their confidence and excitement almost grows as they see the apprentice grow and be able to take on more responsibility and kind of celebrate in how they've been able to help them grow their career as well.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate in that, you know, the keenness to get involved at Irwin Mitchell has been fantastic. I mean, we had around 18 apprentices when I started just over 2 years ago on 3 programs. We've now got just under 80 doing 18 different programs, some of which is basically degree or master's level, sort of like, which is absolutely fantastic. And 40% of our, or just under 40% of our apprentices are internal colleagues who are using apprentices to upskill. I think the other thing is just to say that, one of the key things I ask my apprentices within their teams is, probably 2-3 months in, if not before, just to maybe take 10-15 minutes in a team meeting or that morning huddle, just to basically sort of talk about their apprenticeship, the sorts of things that they're going to be having to learn over the next maybe 2 to 3 months, and just sort of put the sort of feelers out there for people to maybe come in and support that apprentice as well. And that's worked really, really well. And yeah, just making sure that you communicate out the sort of what the vision is. And once people have started to see what the quality of those apprentices are like, normally it can be, you need to give it a few months for those people to embed themselves, but the story then starts to go away in terms of differentiate. Oh, is this a trainee, or is this an apprentice who without a degree? That sort of tends to sort of go away, and they just sort of focus on the individuals that are coming through, which is a really great sort of story and a great sight to see.
Thanks, Lorcan. And to continue on the onboarding piece, I guess considering the personal and professional barriers that apprentice candidates, particularly from lower socio-economic backgrounds, might face, how can a business best set up an apprentice for success, both prior to starting the role and once they're onboarded as an apprentice? Is
that to me, Lizzie?
Yes.
I can start if you want. Yeah, okay. I think for me, it's quite important that people, if some of you are out there looking to embark, please have a go. You can find some amazing talent within sort of the areas that you're wishing to recruit. I think for me, from the very outset, the ideal would be to have a website. The collateral has got to be out there in terms of setting the right tone that align to your objectives, align to your values. A lot more sort of younger people now are looking at the sort of the values, the sort of the culture of firms. For instance, we're hearing a lot more about sustainability in terms of where does that sort of lie in terms of our priorities for people to then think about whether or not the firm's right for them. So you've got to be sort of thinking about having the right message to appeal to as wider an audience as possible. Equally, the marketing material has got to be right, so make sure that it's really sort of all inclusive and there's nobody who could be feeling alienated. It's about, for me, as well, assigning people. So for instance, whenever we recruit from any sort of background, we assign a buddy. They feel that they are able to sort of set up that great rapport with somebody. The onboarding is really, really important as well, so people don't feel pressurized or uncomfortable about asking questions. Again, we're fortunate we've got 18 sites around the country. We don't where people don't have a concern about moving to London or finding the money to get a bond for a flat or something like that. That's why we're fortunate in that we like to recruit the people from the communities in which we serve. They're just some of my initial thoughts. I hope that's useful, Lizzie.
Thank you. And there was one question, I guess more practical, if a young person started a degree apprenticeship and wanted to change course, is that an option? Anna or Kate, do you have any insight?
It is an option. I suppose if they started a degree apprenticeship, individuals on apprenticeships have options to change employer as well as change programs potentially. I suppose ideally you'd want to understand, you'd want some really robust initial assessment ideally before they start the program. Because you wouldn't, it'd be a real shame, wouldn't it, if someone changed program halfway through. I can't see that they would necessarily change from a kind of solicitor to degree apprenticeship to, I don't know, a digital technology services type degree apprenticeship if we had got that initial assessment wrong. However, that is an option. You're not tied into anything actually, apart from employment rights, so apprentices exactly the same as anyone else. I'm talking to the legal sector here, but they would have to give their notice if they wanted to leave your organisation as an employee, in the same way that if there were ever any problems with your apprentices, they go through exactly the same process as any other employee would as well, but hopefully with a bit more additional support, because the training provider would also be part of that arrangement. So helping to try and smooth the way if there were any problems that occurred. And sometimes there are issues that occur with the pressure of studying and working full-time. It can be a lot for young people, but there are things that are now built into the system, like breaks in learning. There are additional learning support things, initiatives that training providers can also put in place to support you as the employer and the apprentice. So yeah, there's lots of different ways of looking at that.
I think the only thing I have actually done this with a company where someone moved from financial services professional, and during the time, and I think you're exactly right, Anna, I don't think we probably onboarded them as well as we could have done. They moved to doing a compliance qualification because that's what they realized they actually needed. The biggest issue is time, in terms of typically the apprentice will have to go back to the beginning, and they get a bit annoyed at that. So say, for example, they're month 6, those 6 months may not be as valuable on the other standard as they were on the standard they were doing. So they get minimal credits really for the other standard. So they may have to go back to the beginning, which may be frustrating, but is definitely worth exploring because it is an option. But I think you have to go through the pluses and the negatives. And also, again, the more strategic you are in setting it up and the more open and specific you are in onboarding and assessment, the less likely that is to happen.
Yeah. And that's not just on the employer, is it? So the training provider will take a real 100% interest in that as well, because actually their funding is at risk. If they put someone on a program and they don't complete, then they're not only their funding, but their success rate.
Yeah,
so it's not just you as the employer, your training provider will help you as well.
Thanks both. I'm conscious we just have a few minutes left. So the final 2 questions. Can you provide any insight in terms of appropriate remuneration or packages when it comes particularly to social mobility candidates facing additional barriers or challenges?
I'm happy to take this one.
Sure.
And an area we've done quite a bit of work on with employers. And I think really it's going back to the very beginning and looking at every stage of your apprenticeship recruitment journey, as Lorcan was kind of setting out, and really thinking, are there any barriers here that we might be able to remove? So for example, if your application process is very online to begin with, then are you thinking about those young people or individuals who may not have access to data, who may not have a laptop to be able to get online and participate in that application process? If you do video interviews or psychometric assessments as part of that, are you thinking about, well, who would we be missing out on? Or would any neurodivergent candidates be put off by the way that we are structuring this? You could think about, if you were bringing people in for interview, are you offering reimbursement for those travel costs, so that if someone, if that was a prohibitive factor for them, that you're removing that and you're offering it to those candidates. You might think about things like relocation. You could think about dressing budgets, dress code budgets. We do this, we're a small organisation, but in with our dress code, we say, if this is going to be a problem, then we've got a discretionary support fund, please speak to us. There are some groups, if you think about care leavers, for example, who might be living independently, then when you think about how they may be managing their money and the budgetary considerations, you might want to think about when they first come onto programme and join you as an employee. If they don't get paid for the first month, as is quite typical, is that going to cause them any problem? Is there anything that you might need to work through with them? And are there any other kind of financial support packages that you might need to consider putting in place, such as travel costs can be a huge burden, or perhaps providing a subsidy for lunch during the first few months so that that's kind of reduced for the individuals. So there's a lot of stuff out there that you can look at, but really, I guess it's no stone unturned. Think about absolutely everything and think, what could we do? How could we help? Where might there be a problem?
Great. We are going to run over, but final question, we'd love to hear from all of you on this, but what does success look like, and how will we know if it's working? Kate, maybe starting with you.
Yes, again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but put in your measures of success and your ROI in your strategy at the beginning so that you can continually respond and look at the progress and check on whether it's a successful program. I think particularly if you are bringing only one person in, it's sometimes hard because obviously you've got the differentiate of that one person. Say, for example, for no reason that anyone can predict, that one person drops out after 3 months. That doesn't mean you should never do apprenticeships again. I that would be my one flag to having any one person. But also I think look to ask the line managers for qualitative and behavioural change as well. And also, to your point, Lorcan, earlier, is how people feel about having this person and this new talent. There should be, for example, diversity of thought, diversity of challenge that they are able to give to the ways of working. Use that as part of your measures of success as well. So it's not just purely, has the young person succeeded in progressing through the apprenticeship? It's the benefit more behaviourally as well, I would say, is include into your measures of success.
Hannah, anything to add?
Yeah, I would add, I think you can see when a program's really working, especially when you're growing it in the early days, where other departments start to come forward saying, I can see how brilliant that is. Can I have one too? And that's a really good measure of success, where you start to see that organic growth throughout the company.
And Lorcan, closing remarks?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about just making sure that, you know, you've got some tangible sort of metrics in place where you can actually see. My boss always says deal with fact rather than opinion. So looking at the levy spend, looking at the social mobility data, where you've got tangible sort of measurements that you can sort of look at. Again, just picking up on what Kate was saying, testimonials, you know, we do surveys to all our participants. Also looking really importantly at the completion rates as well as retention rates. So we're fortunate that we've got non-apprentices doing certain roles. We've also got apprentices doing certain roles. So we're using that sort of data to think about, well, look, you know, is there other ways that we can help market our apprenticeship sort of proposition? So there's a number of different ways. One of the key things though is getting sort of the right return on investment sort of MI. And again, I've been in the early careers for 20 years, and one person's version of ROI might be very different to another. I haven't cracked it yet, but I'm definitely looking to improve it. So watch your space.
Great, and thank you so much for all of those insights. It was great to hear and learn more about the levy, about how to think about training providers, where to start, and start thinking about measures for success. As mentioned at the start, we'll follow up with plenty more information and a link to this recording. I also referenced our Gen Z report, which will be released next month. It covers some of the themes in terms of expectations around this generation when it comes to the workplace. So if you'd like to get involved or learn more about that, or in our Dartmouth Academy, then please do reach out, you know where we are. And then a final massive thank you to our speakers, Kate, Anna, Lorcan. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their day.